Most people want confidence. They know they need discipline, but they go seeking confidence. But they don't understand that confidence comes from discipline. So if you don't have the discipline, you're not going to have the confidence. And also a lot of people look at confidence, again, as a personality trait when it's not. Confidence is not something that you have or don't. And confidence is also not a performance. It's not something you do. Confidence is not a set of activities, not a set of behaviors. Confidence is competence minus interference. No agent ever called me. I never got a call from an agent, but I needed one. So what did I do? I called them. Again, this is the exact opposite of the way it normally works. I was calling agents, telling them, hey, here's who I am. Can you represent me? So I called 60 agents, cold calls, just straight up cold calling agents. If they had a phone number on Google, I called them. And the few I got in touch with, about 20 out of 60, I told them who I was, and I said, hey, I got this scouting report from the camp. I'll send you the link, and I got this footage. And the ones who want the footage, I mailed them the tape. You stop publishing content, you're forgotten because somebody else is going to take your spot. So my job is to make sure that what I create has an impact on others such that they go create success. I used to tell athletes this all the time. Don't watch my videos just to tell me how good I am. Watch the video so you become good. And then when you're good and somebody asks you how'd you get good, maybe I get a mention in your notes that I was one of the people who helped you.
Welcome to the All-Star Athlete Podcast, your guide to mastering the mental game and reaching your full potential. Today, our guest is Dre Baldwin, the creator of Work on Your Game and a former professional basketball player who went from a walk-on at a Division III college program to a decade-long career overseas. Dre built his platform from nothing, posting raw training footage to YouTube back in 2005, long before content creation was a career path, and turned that persistence into a framework now used by athletes and business professionals alike. In today's episode, we get into Dre's core four: discipline, confidence, mental toughness, and personal initiative, and why the order that they come in matters. We talk about the difference between having talent and being in the right vehicle for it, why athletes don't automatically have an edge when they transition into business, and the story behind how a cold email led to 4 TEDx talks. Dre also opens up about what he ultimately wants his work to leave behind long after he's done creating it. This episode is packed with hard-earned lessons on turning consistency into a career when nobody's watching. So let's get right into it. All right. Here we are officially. So, Dre Baldwin, thank you for taking the time for being with us today here on the All-Star Athlete Podcast. I want to formally welcome you to the show.
Well, Justin, thank you for having me on. Excited to be here.
Today, I wanted to spend some time talking about work on your game as well as All-Star mindset. I think we have a lot of things in common between our two businesses, as well as a lot of mindset and ideologies that probably line up pretty well with each other if I had to guess. You specifically played professional basketball overseas after walking on at a D3 college, if I'm remembering that correctly. And right now you have a company that you started a number of years ago called Work on Your Game. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you have a number of different frameworks that you teach to, I believe, athletes and business folks alike that I would like to spend some time chatting about today. So if you could please sort of formally introduce us to your kind of main guiding principles, the core four, if you will, of Work on Your Game.
Sure. So it started from my background in basketball. I used to put videos on YouTube back before it was a popular thing to do. And the athletes who were watching the drills started asking me naturally about my approach, because they saw I was very consistent. And once I started telling them a little bit about my background, they were interested in, well, what keeps you coming to the gym, or what kept you coming to the gym when you didn't have this perfect yellow brick road career? Or how do you have the confidence to show up in the games the same way you do in practice? Why keep trying when you get cut from the high school team? How do you get started if you want to do something like play overseas or start getting known on the internet? Because that was starting to become popular. So I started talking about the concept Work on Your Game was really based in mindset pillars of discipline, confidence, mental toughness, and personal initiative. So when I started talking mindset in that way, Justin, the athletes appreciated it. But what also happened is people who didn't play sports started seeing those messages because I was putting this all on YouTube, and they would tell me, well, Dre, I don't play sports, but the way you explain mindset, that's useful for me, and I'm not an athlete. So that told me that there was a whole other audience, non-athletes, who could benefit from that, and I knew I was going to do something outside of sports after I was done playing. So when I stopped playing in 2015, by that point, I already started to build a non-athlete audience, and naturally, if you think about it, a lot of athletes don't become pros. A lot of athletes don't go on to have careers after high school or college, so they become non-athlete pros even though they used to play basketball. So a lot of those people are still in my audience to this day. So in 2015, when I stopped playing, I just dropped the basketball drill stuff, and I just was talking about, I guess you can call it mindset, but as I worked with more business professionals, it expanded into strategy, systems, and execution, which is where we are today. So for the last 10 plus years, that's what I've been focusing on, and that's what Work on Your Game is now.
Okay, very cool. You started posting, as you were saying, to YouTube back in 2005, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Like, that was probably before most people even knew what YouTube was, or certainly probably most people were posting to it. I feel like every other person nowadays has a YouTube channel. You know, they're making shorts or whatever the social media platform they're on. But back then, not everybody was doing that. So what drove you to start posting on YouTube in the first place?
So yes, you're right. That was before most people were publishing. And what drove me was graduating from college in 2004. Nobody was checking for me to play pro. Nobody was calling me and saying, hey, we got a team here. Here's a contract. Here's an offer. So I knew if I was going to play, I was going to have to do something. This is the personal initiative. I was going to have to do something to get people to notice me and consider me as a viable professional prospect. So I went to these events called exposure camps, which I'm sure you know about, maybe many in your audience. They're like job fairs for athletes. And these are not free. You pay to play, and you bring your sneakers and you actually play whatever sport to prove that you're good enough to play at the next level, whatever it may be. Back then, these were becoming more known for the pro level, but now you have exposure camps for every level. You got exposure camps for fifth graders nowadays. So I went to this exposure camp, played pretty well. The footage, because you could pay extra to get the footage. You paid to attend the camp, but then if you wanted the footage from the games you played, pay the extra $20. I paid the extra $20, played well at the camp. They sent me the footage. The footage was on this thing called a VHS tape. Justin, I don't know if you remember those.
I remember those, yeah.
Okay, so those in your audience under the age of 30, I guess, you can Google it or ask your parents. They'll tell you what it is. So that VHS tape, I knew that, you know, if you can lose a VHS tape, you leave it in the sun, it gets wet, it destroys the footage. And I needed that footage because that was the most important film that I had, because it was me playing against pros instead of playing against Division III guys, like what I had from college. So I took that VHS tape to an audio-visual store and had them put it onto a data CD. And the CD I could put into my home computer, and that footage, that way I could upload the footage to this new website called YouTube, because YouTube said you can just put footage up there for free as much as you want. And there was also at this time Google Video. A lot of people don't know this. Google actually had their own platform called Google Video. They were competing with YouTube.
Right.
But after a few years, they realized they couldn't win, so they just bought YouTube. That's how Google came to own YouTube.
Yep.
So I was putting the footage up there. So that's how it started. And it wasn't some grand strategy at the beginning, Justin. It was just me taking the VHS and putting it on YouTube because I knew, theorized, that YouTube would stick around, whereas that VHS tape might eventually get lost. And when I went and checked back on the video, there were comments from random people asking questions like, hey, who do you play for? Where'd you play? How often do you practice, etc. And anybody who knows the basketball space knows that, or any sport probably, but basketball is my sport. But when you're pretty good and people think you're good, they don't come up to you and say you're good. They just start asking certain questions. So when I noticed from the questions that these people were seeing some skill in me because of the stuff they were asking, because that would happen in person as well. When people think you're good, they ask you where you play it. So I realized, okay, there's an audience here who wants to learn basketball because they obviously are not looking for me because nobody knows me. And clearly they can see that I have something that they need. I deduced all this just from their comments. So that told me, hey, next time I go to the gym, let me record something else and put something else up. But this was very sporadic. I didn't get serious about it until probably about 2008, 2009-ish. I would just put videos out whenever I felt like it from 2005 to 2008. But I still started to build an audience even without a content strategy, as we call it now.
Yeah, well, I guess back then the space wasn't quite so saturated with creators. So if anybody was posting anything up there, it was likely to get seen by a lot more people. Whereas now, if somebody's trying to start a channel, there's just millions of different accounts, and it's like it's hard for that organic growth. I don't know if you've experienced that personally, but I know I've started this mindset coaching business fairly recently as compared to, your journey, and it's hard, man, to like create content that gets pushed in the algorithm, and trying to figure this out, and how often do you post, and what do you post, and how do you reach the right audience, because you can post stuff and it goes to the wrong audience, and then that tanks your watch time and all this type of stuff. So like, do you have all the like algorithms figured out, or are you still trying to figure it out, or talk to me about that?
So no and no to answer your two questions, and the reason why is because I opted out of that game. So
Okay.
we can talk about that if you want. So where that going back to what you said, yes, back then I would put a video up, I would refresh the homepage of YouTube 15 minutes later, and I would see my video on the homepage. So there were much fewer creators at that time, and there was nobody in my lane. I was like the only one in the lane for several years. Probably about 2007, 8, that's when other people started to do it, but I already had them beat because I was established, and I can make content faster and more frequently than them. And the other thing that you said, there wasn't an algorithm back then. There was no algorithm. It was just put a video out, and whatever people search for, they find it. YouTube didn't start doing the algorithmic stuff till about 2010, 2011, at least from what I remember. And they made a big shift about 2014, 15. But before that, it was just the more you put out, the more you get seen. And I was pretty good at that. I'm pretty good at volume. So to answer your other question, when it comes to the content game these days, yes, it's much harder because of the saturation, number one. Number two, because of the algorithm that you can't always quite figure out, and they change it every 3 weeks. It changes moment by moment, right? You log into YouTube now, the algorithm is one thing. You go eat lunch, come back, the algorithm has changed. Now with AI, they're changing the algorithm consistently. So one thing that, just to help you understand why I say I opted out of the game, when I became a YouTube partner, back when you had to apply to get ads on your videos, now they just do it, but back then you had to apply. I read the contract, and when I read the contract, I just didn't like the situation, because YouTube had, and still has to this day, no real competition. Nowadays, I mean, you have your TikToks and your Twitches and all of that, but there's no real competition for long form content that just sits. And I said, these guys can change this percentage anytime they want, and what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? You have no plan B. So I just didn't like the deal. So I said, I'll make videos. I will use the internet and YouTube and social media, but I don't want my business to be based on this, because I have no control. I don't control this. So that's why I will still publish content. If you go on YouTube now, look me up, you'll see recent content, but it's not really part of my marketing / business strategy, to help you understand what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Let's move back to kind of talking about business here, specifically your business. I want to kind of go back to the roots of what we started talking about earlier, the core 4 principles. I think you said it was confidence, discipline, personal initiative, and what was the fourth one?
Mental toughness was third, and personal initiative fourth.
Mental toughness third, personal initiative fourth. Do you list them in that order, like on purpose? Like, are they important
Absolutely.
in that order?
Yeah, so did you say discipline first? Discipline number 1, confidence number
Okay.
2, mental toughness number 3, initiative number 4. And yes, that is intentional.
Okay. Why do you list them in that order specifically?
Well, discipline is the foundation. That's showing up consistently and doing the work. And a lot of people misconstrue where discipline comes from. Justin, they look at discipline as a personality trait. Like, this guy's disciplined and this person's not, as if you either have it or you don't. That's not true. Discipline is a byproduct of structure. Anybody who can follow a structure, i.e. follow instructions, they can be disciplined in their behavior. When we call someone disciplined, what we're talking about is what they're doing, not who they are. So discipline is the foundation, showing up every day, doing the job. Because as a professional, you have to show up every day, even when you don't feel like it. And if you're not a professional trying to become one, you better show up every day, because otherwise you'll never get seen and get a chance in the first place. Now, discipline becomes the source material for confidence. Confidence is number 2. Confidence is defined as your belief in your ability to do something, which comes from the fact that you've done your homework. You prepared, you did the work ahead of time, so that when you do the work in the dark, when it shows up in the light, right? This is the athlete. Practicing by yourself, then you play well in front of the crowd. And also your willingness to put yourself out there, put your work out there boldly and authentically, which you have to do when it's time to perform, because it's a different environment than the practice environment, going out there, putting yourself out there. Most people want confidence. They know they need discipline, but they go seeking confidence. But they don't understand that confidence comes from discipline. So if you don't have the discipline, you're not going to have the confidence. And also a lot of people look at confidence again as a personality trait, and it's not. Confidence is not something that you have or don't. And confidence is also not a performance. It's not something you do. Confidence is not a set of activities, not a set of behaviors. Confidence is competence minus interference. When you remove all the internal interference, such as social anxiety, self-consciousness, thinking what other people are thinking about you, internal negative stress, when you remove all of that, what remains is a confident exterior that people read that and say, wow, this person's confident. It's just because that person has no add-on extras getting in the way. It's like an engine without the gunk. All right, that's confidence. Third is mental toughness. Mental toughness is the security system for your mental health. Now, mental health has become a popular term over the last 10 or so years. And some people think that these things are diametrically opposed, but they're not. Mental health is just your overall human condition. Mental toughness is a security system for your human condition. Mental toughness is about how do you continue to be disciplined and continue to be confident even when you're doing all the quote unquote right things, but you're not getting the results that you expected to get. So I did everything the instructions said. I still don't have the outcome. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with the instructions? What's wrong with the world? What's wrong with the market? Why are the customers not buying? Why is my coach not putting me in the game? When people start asking these questions, usually it leads to them coming up with reasons to quit or stop giving effort. Mental toughness is when you take those same questions and you answer with more empowering answers that move you towards, okay, how do I get better? How do I improve? I didn't make the team. Okay, what do I need to do? Not what does the coach need to do? What do I need to do? I launched the funnel. I put out my latest product and nobody bought it. Nobody clicked on my ad. What do I need to do? How do I bring it back to the person in the mirror and ask myself how I need to change and make an adjustment rather than asking the world to adjust around me? And even though this sounds pretty simple, most people don't ask this question. That's what mental toughness is about understanding that you have the power to make adjustments to adjust your situation. The situation does not adjust to you, you adjust to it. That's mental toughness. And the last piece is personal initiative. That's when we take all these mental pieces and we actually put them to work. This is when we turn that potential energy kinetic, Justin, and that means if nobody's knocking on your door, you knock on some doors. Nobody's ringing your phone, you ring some phones. And that initiative has really been the story of my professional life from college graduation to this very day. Is 99% of the things that I've done, everything we're going to talk about here in this conversation, 99% of it was me initiating something when nothing was happening. It was not somebody came to me or somebody put me on or I knew somebody or my uncle had a thing he put me into. It was none of that. Nothing fell in my lap. It was me going and initiating situations. And off of that initiation, then something else happened, something else happened, something else happened. So those four pieces are not just good sounding theories that I came up with. These are things that I had to actually do myself to get from where I was to where I'm at and from where I'm at to where I'm going. And once I started talking about them, I realized that other people needed them too. So that's how they got branded.
Okay, and those core four, do you call them that? Do you have a specific name for that framework or?
No, I don't call them the core four, but we can call it that. So I just called it, when I first came out with Work on Your Game, it was those four. That was it. Work on Your Game was that. And then as I got into more business things, that's when we did the strategy, systems, execution.
So when you first kind of coined those terms or first started talking about discipline, confidence, mental toughness, and personal initiative, were you only talking about basketball when you came up with that?
Oh, no. I didn't really start calling Work on Your Game a framework that way until I was transitioning out of basketball. Okay. So where that came from, this is a good question. Where that came from was in 2014-15. I stopped playing in 2015. I was playing pickup basketball at University of Miami. I live in Miami. And I was talking to some guy and I was telling him, yeah, I'm about to stop playing. He said, what are you going to do next? And I didn't really know for sure yet. I had all this stuff going on online. I was, ad revenue and training products and coaching, etc. But I said, I maybe want to get into professional speaking. I didn't know anything about the industry, but I knew it existed. I had heard that it existed. And he mentioned something like Toastmasters, which is like a place where people go to practice communication skills. I went to one of the meetings in Miami Beach and I basically told them, hey, I played basketball up to this point, but now I want to move on to something else. I want to get into professional speaking. I heard this might be a good place for it. I don't know. Turns out it was not the right place for it, but there was someone there in the audience. He was actually an NFL player who was retiring at the same time. And he said, hey, there's an event out there where only people who are speakers all go and they meet and, hey, you should go. I couldn't make it. I had a prior engagement, but he said, anybody I meet, I'll give you their info. So he goes to the conference. It was the National Speakers Association, for those who know about them. And he passes me the information of one person who was also based in South Florida. And when I reached out to her, I called her on the phone. I could hear she was on her computer because I could hear her typing. She was like, you have a website? And I did at the time. And she was looking me up on YouTube. I was telling her my name and she's Googling me. And she could see that I had stuff. And when I met her, she said, you have good material because in the professional world, they love athletes. They love athletes because you all have to compete. You have to show up every day. You have to work with a team. You have to deal with losing and come back. And you are open to coaching. And every professional industry needs people like that. So they love athletes who know how to translate what you learned in the locker room to what works in the boardroom. And she said, but what you have to do is you have to figure out how to take this stuff and make it make sense for someone who's never picked up a ball. And that was the framework idea. And as soon as she said it, I understood it. I understood the mission as soon as she said that. So I just set about figuring out, how do I take these pieces that I know the athletes needed, but I'm also finding, because remember what I told you, Justin, the non-athletes were finding me on YouTube and they were commenting. So I already knew they needed it. So I was just going off of what they were saying. And I'm asking myself, okay, someone who doesn't play basketball, how can they understand going to the gym every day and working out? How can they understand performing when it's time to perform? How can they understand keep going when you face a setback, like getting cut from the team, or you had a bad game, or your team got eliminated from the playoffs? How can they understand it? And I just thought, oh, how does this apply for someone who doesn't play sports? Well, it was actually pretty simple. So that's when I just had to edit the language. The terms didn't change because everybody needs discipline. Doesn't matter what you do. Everybody needs confidence. Everybody needs mental toughness. How do you change the way you describe it so that someone who doesn't play sports can get it, but then you can use a sports reference, because that is like the kind of adds flavor to it. That makes it mine because I played sports. So I have some credibility using a sport reference rather than just a business reference. And that's how I started to adopt these pieces for the professional world. And they responded positively to it. That's how I knew I had something.
Right. And when you were playing basketball and you were creating these YouTube videos, were you thinking about this from a business perspective? Were you aware of these mantras or mindsets, right? These personality factors, or whatever you want to call them, the discipline, the confidence, the mental toughness, the personal, like, were you aware of that stuff when you were playing? Were you kind of already building for the future, or was it only after you were kind of in this transition period where you were thinking back like, geez, what did I do and what made me so successful and how can I translate this? Like, talk to me about that a little bit.
Great question. So yes and no. Yes, in that I was slowly realizing those 4 principles are differentiators when all other factors are equal. Now, I played Division III college ball, but I mixed and mingled with Division II, Division I players who had stronger pedigree, more talent. They showed their talent more earlier than I had. That's why they ended up at the colleges they ended up at. And one thing I realized, that a lot of players, even with more talent than me, they had no discipline. I came across so many athletes who had no discipline. Like, they couldn't go to class back when, I don't know what it's like now, but back then you had to go to class enough to be eligible. I can't remember the last time I heard of an athlete being academically ineligible. Do you even hear about that anymore, Justin? I can't remember the last time I heard it.
I mean, my impression, and I could be totally wrong about this, but I think that especially at like D1 schools in particular, again, I'm not like in that scene, but my understanding is that a lot of them are in like marketing and like business and communications, and I'm going to call them pretty soft majors, if we're being honest, as far as like the academic requirements. And I've actually heard that they have like kind of armies of tutors that do a lot of their work for them. I could be totally off base about that. So if anybody in the comments really wants to correct me on that, I would be happy to like be set in my place. But I feel like a lot of these guys, like, and this is a whole different conversation that maybe we're not going to get into today. The whole, the term student athlete is in place for a specific reason, so that, you know, and then there's NIL deals and all this type of thing, but like they really should be athlete students at the D1 level particularly, but this is a whole different conversation. But I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah, so they probably won't even be students anymore because with the money now, it's a different game. But
yeah, they're basically they're amateur athletes, right, playing at a college so that they can go pro.
Yeah, well, you're getting paid, so you can't be an amateur. So they're kind of like pro athletes, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So I went to Penn State University. That's where my degree is. Now, Penn State has 23 campuses. I went to the Altoona campus, which is Division III, and is only 40 minutes away from the main campus, which is where the football team is that everybody knows. So I know some athletes at the Division I, new athletes at the Division I level at that time. And I would hear of athletes being academically ineligible, but it doesn't happen anymore. And I brought that up. I can't remember why I brought it up in the first place. But the whole point here is back when I was... Wait, tell me what your question was again, because I got lost from even what I was saying. And I'll pick up my...
So originally I was asking you about, like, these principles that you have, right? The discipline, the confidence. Like, did that start when you were playing, or was it only during the transition period that you were like, how can I make this leap into the next part of my life?
Yes, this is where I was. So reason I brought up the academics is because I knew players who were talented who couldn't play because they didn't have the right grades. And I went to Penn State, which is not an easy school to get into, let alone easy to graduate, no matter what your major is. So there were players who went there because the coaches were able to get that player in academically because they wanted the player, but then the player couldn't cut it. They would get them in athletically, because they were a player, but then they couldn't cut it academically, so they ended up ineligible, ending up actually flunking out of school and never getting to play college ball because they went to the wrong school in the first place. So that discipline, then it was the discipline of just literally working on your game. Most of my teammates in college, I never saw them come to the gym if it was not a team required activity. It was only a handful, me and like two of my other teammates who are still best friends of mine to this day. We were the only ones who would come to the gym and practice on our own outside of what the team required. People just didn't have the discipline. Confidence is one that, again, in everything that I did, I had to have the belief that it could work before it actually worked. Mental toughness is, okay, can you keep that belief even when you just got slapped in the face with reality? Most people have confidence when they start until they get slapped in the face with reality. Then that confidence goes away real quick. Mental toughness is, can you keep going even when nothing is pointing towards this is going to work? Can you keep trying? And that's what I was doing. And then the initiative was, again, nobody was saying it was going to work in the first place, only me. So I just kept trying stuff even when it wasn't working. And then when it did work, it became validation of everything that I had tried up to that point. Then I made it work again and again and again to the point that the backstory became, I mean, it's a good sounding story because it shows like, okay, this person really had to do these things. But then the reality kind of replaces the backstory of what happened. It just becomes, this is a successful person. This person has created quote unquote success. So answering your question, along the way, the discipline was something I always noticed that a lot of people didn't have. Showing up consistently, I knew I could separate myself. The confidence, anybody can put on a show of confidence. But again, we'll find out you really have confidence when you face a setback to that confidence. And the initiative, most people don't have that. So that's one that I knew most people didn't have. Most people are not willing to do what I did to get to where I got, even let's just keep it basketball. I tell you another story. I told you I went to that exposure camp and I got the VHS tape. Now, going to the exposure camp did not get me signed to a contract. I went there, I played well, and I was working at the time at this gym called Bally Total Fitness. You remember those guys?
I do.
Yeah, so I was working there in the summer of 2005. I negotiated with my boss to get 3 days off. I needed Friday, Saturday, Sunday because the exposure camp was in Orlando. So I had to go to Orlando. We drove to Orlando from Philly, drove back to Philly. I had to be back at work on Monday. So the camp was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I had to be back at work on Monday. And when I got back, again, I did not have a contract in hand. I had just played well at the camp, and all the material doesn't come out till a week or so later. So the scouting reports went on the website about a week later, and the VHS tape comes back to your house via physical mail like 2 weeks later. So I still have to go back to work. There's no guarantee anything's going to happen here. I just went to the camp and came back. Nothing changed. I needed an agent. Once I got the footage, I said, okay, now I can go get me an agent. Now, anybody knows anything about the sports world or the literary world or the entertainment world, an agent is a person who recognizes you as someone who can potentially get a job. So they come and ask, can I represent you? Because if you get a job, you make money and they make money. So agents look for talent and they go sign talent to help you make money and to help themselves. No agent ever called me. I never got a call from an agent, but I needed one. So what did I do? I called them. Again, this is the exact opposite of the way it normally works. I was calling agents, telling them, hey, here's who I am. Can you represent me? So I called 60 agents, cold calls. Just straight up cold calling agents. If they had a phone number on Google, I called them. And the few I got in touch with, about 20 out of 60, I told them who I was, and I said, hey, I got this scouting report from the camp. I'll send you the link, and I got this footage. And the ones who want the footage, I mailed them the tape. I had a double-decker VCR at home. Again, those Gen Z, is it Gen Z now? Gen Z
I don't know what generation we're on.
Yeah.
I'm a millennial myself, so.
Okay, so anybody under 30, you can Google a VCR.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I had a double-decker VCR, so I could make copies of my VHS tape, and I would
Right.
mail those copies out with a bubble mailer. And I sent 20 out. Out of 20 I sent out, one agent I was able to get back in touch with, and he said, I will represent you. He's the guy who got me my first job. That was in Kaunas, Lithuania in late summer. So it was about, I don't know when this is coming out, but it was late August 2005. That's how I got my first job. And that was all off of, again, I had to initiate everything that happened from the time I got done playing in college to the time I started playing pro, and then throughout my career. So answering your question here finally, all of these elements I was using, but I wasn't putting a label on them, especially the last two. Personal initiative, mental toughness, I didn't put a label on those until later. Discipline and confidence, everybody knows about them, and I was talking about them, but I hadn't put them into a framework until later when I started talking mindset around 2010. That's when the response by the audience said, hey, the way you describe this stuff is really useful. That's when I knew there was something there.
Okay. So I want to talk about continuing kind of on this point. Work on your game started in sport and then
Yes.
transitioned into business, which is mostly what you do now. Do you think athletes as a kind of, I don't want to say as a sub category of humans, I guess, like if we want to put people into a box, right, and it's a specialty, right? Do you think athletes have a genuine edge when they transition into business as opposed to someone else that just started in academics or started, I don't know, a blue collar job? Do you think athletes have a genuine edge when they transition into business, or is that just like a story that we tell ourselves?
I think it's a story we tell ourselves, and I'll tell you why. It really depends on who the person is. It depends a lot on who the person is, because you got to understand the life of an athlete at the professional level. A long day of work at work is like 4 hours. Those are the days when you had 2 practices. All right, game day is not that much work. It may be 3 hours of time if it's a home game, but it's not really a lot of work. The practices are much harder days. Training days are much harder. So you have a lot of free time on your hands as an athlete, yet you're still making a full-time salary. 4 hours is a long day, but you get a full-time salary. So if you're going to leave sports, or everybody eventually has to leave sports, and most athletes can't just sit home and count their money for the rest of their lives from age 35 to death. So most athletes go do something else after sports. It's very hard to transition from working 4 hours on a long day to working 8 hours on a normal day. Especially there's no cameras, there's no lights, there's no fans, you're not a star anymore, and you're on the left and the right of you are people who are better than you at that thing. You just came from being a man playing a sport. Now you're a nobody in the business world. You haven't proven anything in the business world. And yes, there are a few. If you're famous, if you're Kobe, then yeah, you're still the man because you're Kobe. But how many athletes are Kobe Bryant? How many athletes are Tom Brady? Not many. Most athletes, when they stop playing their sport, like if you think about it, what's your favorite sport to watch, Justin?
Probably basketball.
Okay, basketball. So you think about some players who've retired they retired 5 to 10 years ago. If I was to just list off a name of them, you would be like, oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. Where's he at? What's he doing? Oh yeah, that guy, I remember him. You remember what they look like and everything, what team they played on, but you haven't even considered them after they stopped playing. And they're all doing something. And they have to start at, you got to build yourself up again. Now, a lot of athletes usually, I guess smartly you can say for most of them, they stay in this space. So they become coaches, trainers, analysts if they can. But if you go into a different space where you're nobody, like I did, you got to build that up from zero. And most people don't have the discipline to build up from zero. They don't have the mental toughness to be a nobody. And that's the reason why athletes don't have an edge when they're doing that. Now, if you're a basketball player and you become a basketball trainer, well, who are you competing against? Other basketball players. So that's not even a real comparison to me. If what I'm talking about is athletes who leave the sport and you go do something that has nothing to do with playing a sport, and you had to build your name up from ground zero, most athletes don't even, either they don't go that route because of all the reasons I stated, or they do, but again, there's no fanfare, so you don't even notice them. There's a bunch of who have, but nobody talks about them because what reason do you have to talk about them? You're still watching the basketball games, and they've pretty much disappeared. So does that answer your question?
It does. It almost sounds like, originally I was asking if you think athletes have a genuine edge when they transition into business. It almost sounds like the opposite is true. Like they're at a disadvantage.
Because you're going from where everything was about you using your body, and your body is the product, to now, on some level, you have to use your mind. Now, I think what you're alluding to, and this is what I was talking about when I said I create the framework of work on your game. Every athlete has to deal with leadership, good and bad, teamwork, different types of opponents, competing every day, show up and do your job all the time. You have to learn to compete. Everything is about the scoreboard and winning. Those things are useful. This is the reason why a lot of organizations, because if we back up a little bit here, Justin, most athletes don't play pro, right? Most athletes play college and they go do something else out of college. So a lot of organizations like to recruit athletes out of college because of the things that I just said. And also, most sports are not revenue sports, as we say. Most sports are not the kind of sports where you have a chance to make millions playing. Football, baseball, basketball, I guess maybe hockey. Most of the other sports, that's pretty much it. It's very hard to make it in all the other sports. So if you played a sport in college and you know you're not going to go play pro, so you're not going to put any time into that, you're looking for your job. So if I'm a recruiter, I'm looking at the track team. I'm looking at the volleyball team, the soccer team, the baseball team, the guys on the basketball team who are not trying to play pro. I would love to recruit them because they already have these internal traits that they learned from playing sports, and they're not trying to go make it pro. They're my perfect recruits. But those are the guys who went straight from college, who knew they were not playing pro. Now, somebody who played pro, that's a different beast. That's a different animal to deal with. And I think it's a mixed bag as to how those people come out. It really depends on their mental makeup.
Okay. Here's a slightly different question for you. I mean, it's all related, right? But slightly different from what we were just talking about. A lot of people say that consistency is about systems and habits. But you, specifically, were consistent for years before anyone cared. Like, you were consistent, grinding, working on your game, like, for years before anyone cared. You weren't recruited. Like, even after you went to the camp, you had to reach out. You had to have that personal initiative. Like, how do you stay consistent when there's no external feedback telling you what you're doing is working?
It's a really good question. And for me, it was a couple things. Number one, I knew that it was a competitive advantage potentially because nobody else was doing that. I knew most people, if they were looking at the reality I was looking at in 2004 up through 2005, they would not have continued. So I said, I have very little competition here. So if I can make this work, it's going to work very well because nobody's competing with me here. And the other thing is you have to have a vision in your mind that is stronger than the reality in front of your face. So the third eye, as we say, vision you can see in your mind, but you can't see with the physical eye. And that third eye for me was very strong because what I was seeing in front of my physical eye was not pretty. I had a college degree, but my first job out of college was working at Foot Locker. Then I worked at Bally Total Fitness. I was still living in my parents' home. I didn't have anything going on. I had the money I was making from those jobs. So you can kind of get a feel for what I had there. It wasn't really anything else going on. So if I don't make this work, I don't know what I am going to do. I mean, I had a degree, so I could always, quote unquote, use my degree, as they say, but I didn't really want to. I wanted to play ball, and I had strong enough reasons to want to make that happen because I believe I had the ability. I believed I could see the path. Go to an exposure camp, number one, get the footage, number two, get an agent, number three, let the agent do their job, number four, and then when I go play, number five, play well enough that I stay in the game and I don't get spit right back out. I could see that path even though it hadn't happened yet. So that's what allowed me to keep going, and I had the discipline to actually follow through on that path. Now, a follow-up question that I'll ask myself here is, how do you have the discipline to follow through on that path? Yeah, it's one thing to see it, it's another thing to do it. I would have to give credit to my upbringing. I have to give credit to my parents. My parents are not athletes. My dad is avid sports fan, but he's not a player. My dad's like 5'8". I'm 6'4". He's biological. We did the tests and everything, Justin. But he and my mom went to work every day. They didn't have sexy jobs like the kind of stuff that we do here. They had regular jobs. My dad worked with his hands in a factory. He did music as a passion at night. My mom is an educator. They never complained about going to work every day, and they never bragged about going to work every day, but they went to work every day. So that was the example that was set for me at home. And when I went to the basketball court, I took that same example and applied it to my training that eventually made me from mediocre to okay to acceptable to pretty good. And then when it worked in basketball, I took that same principle and I applied it in business. And then when I started sharing it with the world, I noticed that a lot of people said, well, hey, I need that. And that's what became the conversation we're having right now.
So it sounds like, and shout out mom and dad, shout out to your mom and dad, my mom and dad, all the moms and dads out there. Quoting KD, Mom, you're the real MVP, right? I'm sure you're familiar with that one. Yeah. So it sounds like just good old-fashioned hard work. You had a good upbringing, and you learned from your parents that, to your point, right, a lot of athletes, they're in the spotlight. But when you're working at a company, a business, out in the fields, whatever you're doing, like there's no spotlight on you. Nobody's, I mean, yeah, maybe your manager's like paying attention to what you're doing, probably, but like nobody cares. Nobody's really paying attention to you, right? Like, but your paycheck depends on you showing up every day on time, doing your job at more than an average level for the most part. Otherwise, you're probably going to get laid off or fired. So it sounds like just good old-fashioned hard work, discipline. You learned that at a young age, and you applied that to yourself, and then you had this vision and this belief in yourself, and then you just kind of kept chipping away and putting in the hard work and having the discipline and putting the content out there and just believing in yourself. Is that right?
Yes, and I'll add in a caveat to that, because you're mentioning hard work, because this is something that I've talked about with audiences a lot as well. Because there's a saying that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. I'm sure you've heard that. A lot of athletes talk about that. And I think a lot of coaches use it as a motivational tool with their players. And I say that is true with an asterisk. It's true when the talent levels are relatively equal. Now, if I was, let's say, a clone of myself who was the same height as my dad, who's 5'8", all right, that person working hard would not beat me at 6'4", no matter how hard they work, because they're in the wrong vehicle. So one of the principles over here at Work on Your Game is you have to be in the right vehicle. Right vehicle, then when you're in the right vehicle that suits your talents, your temperament, your natural attributes, then you apply discipline, hard work, mental toughness, etc. That's when you get the winning formula. But if you're in the wrong vehicle, you can work as hard as you want, and your results are going to be mediocrity. Now, how do you know what?
At best.
Exactly. Right. Now, how do you know you're in the right vehicle? Well, you don't always know. So you have to try different things. I played a little bit of football. I played a little bit of baseball, but neither one of those was the right vehicle. When I got in the right vehicle and applied the effort, that's when things started working slowly at first, but they eventually worked. Even in business, I'm sure you understand this, Justin, in business, how many products, courses, ideas do you launch that don't work? I've launched a bunch. I've launched many more that didn't work than the ones that did work.
Of course.
Right. So you have to find the right vehicle, or we call it, in business, you call it the level 10 opportunity. What is that? You don't always know. You got to try a bunch of things before you find the thing that works. So yes, hard work, but hard work at the right thing, and you don't always know what the right thing is, and such is life. That's what makes it what it is.
Yeah, for sure. I've talked about that with my brother before. Like, I could work twice as hard as LeBron James, but if I'm 6 feet tall and he's 6'8", and has, right, whatever his wingspan is, and I've got like a negative right wingspan. Like, there's no amount of hard work.
Fiber,
it doesn't,
right,
there's nothing I can do. Like, I could work twice as hard. And sure, like, there are some NBA players that have made it at, under 6 feet tall or whatever. There's a guy in the NBA right now. I think he's from like, Japan. I think he's Japanese. He's on the Bulls, like Yuki or something. Forget what team he's on, but he's like 5'7" or 5'8". There's been a few guys, right? But it's few and far between. Like the guys that play at the NBA level or the professional level of any sport, like they're already like 0.000001% of the population. So and these are guys that are 6'2", 6'3" at a minimum, right? That are making it. Most, like, what's the average height of the NBA player these days?
NBA probably 6'6", 6'7".
Yeah, like, and
right,
what percentage of the population is even that height, right? Like,
very few.
Less than 1%.
5'7". The average American is 5'7",
right?
5'8".
So yeah. As far as kind of moving on here, you obviously have a lot of personal stories and a lot of wisdom to share with everybody. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today to discuss some of this. Specifically, I wanted to address that you've given, I believe, 4 TEDx talks.
Yeah.
How did those come to be? What did you talk about on there? Those have a very specific format. Like, talk to me a little bit about your TED Talk experience.
Well, if you couldn't guess, I got all those talks because I reached out to them. They didn't reach out to me. And those came from, I'll tell you where that came from. Are you familiar with Tim Ferriss, podcaster, author?
I have heard of him, yes.
Okay, so he has a interview show. He does these long form interviews, like 2-3 hour interviews. He had a guy on his show named Derek Sivers. Derek Sivers is an author, and I listened to that interview. It was pretty long, 2-3 hours. And Derek was asked at the end of the interview. Tim says, "How can people find out more about you?" You know, the same thing a lot of hosts ask at the end of an interview. And Derek said, "Well, anybody, if they want, they can email me." And he gave his email address. And Tim said, "You sure you want to do that?" Because Tim has a very popular podcast. He said, if you get your email address, you're going to get a ton of emails. You're going to get 1,000 emails. And Derek said, "That's okay. I will work through and I will answer every email. It may take me a while, but I'll answer." So he put his email address out there, and I emailed him. Again, here's the personal initiative again. I emailed him, and I said, "Hey," this is about 2014, by the way, so people understand. I said, "Hey, Derek, I'm a fan of yours," which I was. I had heard of him before that interview. "I'm a fan of yours. I read your books." He had a couple books out there, and he used to have his company called CD Baby back in the day. And I just mentioned my references to him, how I knew about him, and, "Hey, I heard you on Tim Ferriss. That's the reason I'm emailing you." And I had a specific ask. This is important for the people listening. If you reach out to a person who's probably more in demand than you are, you need to be specific as to what you want. So my specific ask was, "Hey, I play basketball. Here's what I'm doing, et cetera, et cetera. I want to get into professional speaking, but I don't know how. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. Do you have any advice on what direction I go to take what I have and turn it into possibly speaking on stages?" Because I had heard him speak on stage before, on video, not in person. And he wrote back and said, "Hey, I really appreciate the introduction," like, because he could tell it was genuine. I really did know who he was. I wasn't just cold emailing random people. And he said, "I suggest you try to do a TEDx talk." He said, "Go to the TEDx website, put in wherever you live, and it'll pop up a bunch of events happening where you live, and you can just apply to those events, and then you can speak at the events." And I said, "Well, thank you. I appreciate it." And here's the next part. When you get information from a mentor, actually do what they tell you to do. So I actually did that. I went and looked up TEDx where I was. I'm in South Florida, and my first TEDx talk was at Broward High School, which is Broward is where Fort Lauderdale is, right above Miami, north of Miami. My second one was in Coconut Grove, which is in Miami. My third one was at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, UNLV, right off the strip in Vegas. My fourth one, believe it or not, was in South Dakota. Because what happened is I started looking up TEDx talks. I didn't limit myself to the local area because I would look up the events, and it just said you can apply. It didn't say you had to be from there. So I said, they got airplanes, right? I can apply, and
Sure.
if they select me in Seattle, I'll go to Seattle. So I just started applying for TEDx talks everywhere. And those are the 4 that I landed, and that's how I did those 4 talks. And each of those talks is about, I talked about discipline, I talked confidence, I talked mental toughness, and I talked taking initiative on your career, even after the first one maybe doesn't work out. So basically those 4 pieces of the framework, each of my talks is about one of those. One thing that I will add that I want the audience to understand is that I did 4 TEDx talks. I applied for about 50. So I want people to understand that those of you in the sales world, you understand when you're reaching out cold, you should expect a very low response rate. So don't think I was 4 for 4. I applied for a lot more than I actually did.
Hey, 8% success rate in the cold call world. That's very successful, actually.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
All right. So, Dre, as we kind of approach the end of our time together here today, I wanted to ask you, when you finish your career doing what you're doing right now, or maybe you have other things planned that you're planning on doing in the future. You've finished your basketball career. Right now you're doing kind of the business thing, and who knows what kind of direction you're going to go with that specifically in the future. But I wanted to ask you, when you finish your career, when it's all said and done, what is the one thing that you hope people remember the most about you, your business, or your frameworks?
That I made an impact on people's lives that goes beyond me. because that's the only thing that actually matters, Justin. We can do things for ourselves, and while we're alive and active and quote unquote hot in the space, you can be known, you have your followers, you get your likes and your comments and your engagements, but as soon as you go away, you're forgotten. Like I just said, if I mentioned some NBA player who retired 10 years ago, you would remember him, but then you remember that you forgot about him, right? As soon as he stopped playing. And that same thing happens to all of us. Right? As soon as you stop publishing content, you're forgotten because somebody else is going to take your spot. So my job is to make sure that what I create has an impact on others such that they go create success. I used to tell athletes this all the time. Don't watch my videos just to tell me how good I am. Watch the video so you become good. And then when you're good and somebody asks you how'd you get good, maybe I get a mention in your notes that I was one of the people who helped you or inspired you to go do what you need to do for yourself. That's how my name lives on if there's 100 of you out there with success, not if there's 100 of you who say I'm good, because as soon as I'm gone, you're going to be watching the next guy. So how do I create the next guy who becomes successful? Not create him, that's the wrong word, unless it's one of my kids. But how do I inspire the next guy to be great? And maybe some of them will mention me when they get asked, when they're doing an interview, what inspired you to get started? And they say, oh, I used to watch this guy. Same way I just mentioned Tim Ferriss. I mentioned Derek Sivers. And they will say, hey, Dre Baldwin. He was one of the people that gave me a little bit that helped me move forward. And then also just creating assets that are serving other people to where the asset becomes the thing and nobody's really talking about me. Same way that we all, because he's famous, we know who Jeff Bezos is, but you don't need to meet Jeff Bezos to use Amazon. Everybody knows who Amazon is. You don't have to really know about Jeff Bezos to use Amazon. Everybody knows Windows. You don't have to know Bill Gates. We all know Apple. You don't know Steve Jobs. So how do you create something that lasts and everybody's still using it, talking about it, benefiting from it, even when you know the worms have eaten your bones? So that's really what I'm focused on.
So in kind of the, we talk about this in research a lot. You've probably heard about this, like stand on the shoulders of giants kind of idea. There was a generation before us that, as you were mentioning, Tim Ferriss, and I'm sure you have plenty of other mentors that maybe went unmentioned today, but they inspired you to, they gave you the platform that you're on right now, and now you're kind of, creating a business and creating a platform and creating a mindset and a mentality and frameworks that you hope that other people will then kind of stand on and utilize to become the best versions of themselves, and then hopefully kind of, pay it back to you as in like, hey, like Dre really inspired me. Maybe it's your business name, maybe it's your personal name, whatever it is, as you were mentioning, Apple, Amazon, these kind of companies. But it sounds like you really just want to help other people become the best versions of themselves. Is that true?
Yes, that's right. And the things that I created, again, hopefully playing a small, if not bigger, role in those people being successful.
All right. Well, Dre, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrapped up today?
I'll tell everybody has a game. I mean, my brand's called Work on Your Game. So you need to know what game you're in. A lot of people get confused about that. Know what game you're in, then figure out how do you best design your game to play that game and achieve the desired outcome of that game. Know what the scoreboard is, and that's what you work on your game for, is winning on the scoreboard. When you produce those results, you get whatever rewards you want.
All right, Dre. Well, thank you very much once again for taking the time to share your wisdom with us today, and I look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
Absolutely, Justin. I appreciate you sharing your platform. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, Dre. Have a great day. We'll chat soon, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.